Hi, everyone. I'm Katina McHenry, Communications Director here at the McCombs School of Business, and you are joining us today on our Big Ideas Show, where we take a deeper look into faculty research happening here at the McCombs School of Business. Joining me today is Amit Kumar, one of my favorite professors, and we are talking to him about his new piece of research, which I am so interested in because we're communicators and because I deal a lot in just the emotion of communication and how you feel by what someone says. I'm really excited to talk to you about this paper today. So welcome to Big Ideas today, Amit.
Thanks. It's always a treat to talk to you, and as we'll discuss, it feels really good to talk to people.
Yes,
So we'll
exactly.
enjoy this.
Exactly. So the title of your new paper, it's called "It's Surprisingly Nice to Hear You. Misunderstanding the Impact of Communication Media Can Lead to Suboptimal Choices of How to Connect with Others." So I think in summary, to summarize it, it really has to do with how important the human voice is and how important it is to actually hear someone's voice rather than read what they're saying in a text or an email. So talk a little bit more about what your research is and some of the conclusions that you came to.
Yeah, you summarized it just as well as I could, I'd say. So we know that humans are social species. That's one thing that's fundamental to human life. And I study happiness and well-being and satisfaction, and we know that positive connections with other people are essential for happiness. So it's kind of a strange time right now, as we all know, where we're using this term social distancing all the time. As we've talked about, it's a bit of a strange, as you and I have talked about, it's a bit of a strange term because, of course, we want everyone to be as safe and responsible and healthy as possible. We've all pledged to committing to protect Texas together, but the term social distancing is a bit of a misnomer in that people are really being asked to maintain physical distance rather than social distance. And so we know that maintaining these social connections is really important for both mental and physical health. You and I have previously discussed how there's these epidemiological analyses that indicate that lack of social support can be really problematic. Feeling lonely is a risk factor for morbidity and mortality. And so what we were interested in here is how can people maintain that sense of social connection that's so important? Modern technology, of course, gives us lots of communication media, as you're aware of, different ways people can connect with each other, but they might not all strengthen social connection equally. So we were kind of interested in testing whether the media through which individuals interact can affect their sense of connection to another person. Importantly, we were also interested in whether people's expectations kind of enable them to choose media wisely in a way that sort of maximizes this sense of connection.
Yeah, you say in your paper and you emphasize the how people choose to connect with others may therefore affect well-being. So talk to me a little bit about just the subjects that you interviewed, what you were looking for. Talk a little bit more about that. You did just a minute ago, but how the mode of communication they chose, what difference it made to their well-being and just how they felt.
Yeah, so there's a lot in this paper, and some of it has to do with predictions, kind of expectations or anticipated feelings of connection. Some of it has to do with the choices and decisions people make between these communication media. And then, as you were just alluding to, some of it importantly has to do with how we actually feel when we use these different communication media. And so what we were interested in here was the notion that voice-based interactions, things like calling people up on the phone or having a video chat like we're doing right now, these types of interactions that involve the voice might actually produce a stronger sense of connection. But even though that's the case, people might sometimes choose to use text-based media when they're trying to connect with other people. And that can happen due to what we refer to as miscalibrated expectations or mistaken beliefs about the outcomes of social interaction. So any interaction that we have with another person can come with some combination of costs and benefits, and it can be problematic when people sort of either overestimate costs or underestimate benefits, especially when it comes to how we communicate with others, whether we're communicating with our voices or through our fingers by typing on our keyboards. And so what these experiments suggest is that these miscalibrated expectations can affect how people choose to connect with others, and it might lead them to make choices that may not be the best for how they feel. So often it's helpful, I think, to describe the types of experiments that we did. In one experiment, for example, what we did is we had participants reconnect with an old friend, someone they hadn't talked to recently. Perhaps lots of people are doing this right now. I know there's a ton of Zoom happy hours and things like that happening these days. How do people choose to do that, and what's sort of the way to do that might maximize how connected you feel to someone else? So what we did is we had people make predictions about what it would be like to get in touch with this other person if they reached out either by sending them an email or by calling them up on the phone. Both of those are ways in which you can reconnect with someone else. We then also assigned participants to actually reconnect, to call up an old friend or to email an old friend, and then we sent them out into the world. We followed up with them to see how they really felt once they'd had a chance to connect with their friend. So participants predicted how connected and importantly how awkward they would feel when reconnecting using their voice and through text, through email. So for expectations of connection, in this case, people did kind of get that they feel more connected when interacting over the phone than over email. But they also thought that talking on the phone would be way more awkward than interacting over email. And we also had them indicate which they preferred. What would you rather do? People, even though they said that they believe that talking leads to stronger bonds, they said they'd rather type instead of talk. A majority said they'd rather send an email. And this had a lot to do with these expectations about awkwardness driving their choice. Rather than how connected they feel, they're worried about things being kind of uncomfortable, or it might be kind of weird if I call someone up on the phone or something like that. And these fears about awkwardness kind of push people towards these text-based methods of communicating. But more important than that, I'd argue, we looked at how people really feel. And when we have people really do this in a field experiment, when they really call someone up on the phone, when they really email someone, what we find is that they do feel more connected when they're talking than when they're typing. And there's no difference in how awkward these two modes of communication are in reality. So you think it's going to be awkward and it's not that awkward, and you end up feeling much more connected when you're talking to somebody rather than when you're typing to somebody.
Yeah. This is, the whole piece of research is so interesting to me. I don't know if I told you this, but I taught a class, an adjunct class at a different university several years ago, and the class was focused on communication and how technology has changed the way we communicate. And so I would do these different experiments with the students and give them different assignments. And some of the assignments, the feedback that I got was so interesting, how they, when you talk about choice, how they chose to, depending on what the message was, how they chose to communicate with a certain person or individual. And then I remember one of the students talked about the importance of just the in-person meeting and the importance of the phone call. And her mom did a lot of her work virtual, but when she had important meetings, she would have to go and visit with the person, in person to have the meeting, because there was so much that was lost, so much emotion, gestures that was lost in the virtual communication. So to hear you talk about the choices and also the importance of just the voice, because I think in technology, we lose the inflection, we lose the tone of the voice, we lose meaning of words in a virtual setting. So I love this piece of research for all of those reasons.
That's super interesting. I didn't know that you had taught a class like that. And so I feel like whenever we talk, a bunch of thoughts pop into my mind when you say stuff. So a couple things there that I think are interesting. One is that with regards to technology, as you're talking about, I think developers of technology are kind of providing ever increasing opportunities for text-based interactions. And I think it's important that these developers, these tech developers, don't just cater to things like how easy it is to use, but also pay attention to the actual effectiveness, what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to connect us to other people. So even though there's some demand or some preference for these kind of less intimate ways of connecting via text, this work suggests that these expectations are driving those preferences. Just because that demand exists doesn't mean that those services ultimately provide the most satisfaction. So technology, one thing, so we only looked at interactions at a distance, wasn't in-person or face-to-face communication. But obviously we're connecting with each other at a distance all the time these days. This is the work from home edition of these big idea stories. And so that technology can be great. It's not that technology is super problematic. We can use it to connect with each other, but it's important that we use it wisely. And so one other thing that I'll bring up before you get back to asking me questions is you brought up sort of gestures and nonverbal communication and things like that. In another experiment, we actually had an audiovisual condition as well. So what we did is we had participants connect over text chat, voice chat, or video chat. And that audiovisual condition, that allows us to test whether kind of additional cues further this sense of social connectedness, or whether it's really hearing someone's voice that leads to these feelings of connection. And it turns out that media containing only the voice actually create just as strong a sense of connection between consumers of technology as audiovisual media do. This is actually consistent with some prior research. So some of these nonverbal cues like nodding and gesturing and things like that might not be that important above and beyond hearing someone's voice. So when you hear my voice, I can change my pitch variance, my intonation. I can get louder, or I can talk a little softer. And doing those sorts of things with your voice, that is a cue towards the fact that I'm a thinking and feeling human being. And so what is connecting with someone else? It's connecting to the mind of another person. And these voice-based cues indicate the presence of that thinking and feeling mind. So the video chat, that's not to say don't do video chat. Media, it's just that media containing only audio, things like phone calls, can create just as strong a sense of connection as audiovisual media, but both of those are better than text-based media.
So as we go forward in this virtual setting for however long, how much longer, we don't know. So what would you suggest people do to stay connected? What would be your top 3 suggestions for people based on your research?
The top 3 is kind of hard. I think the most important thing is that people are intentional about the choices that they make. So we might feel like it's going to be a little strange to call somebody up on the phone. And when we have those feelings, we might choose to send them an email or send a text message instead. And so what I would suggest to folks in their everyday lives is to communicate with other people quite simply using their voices. So I know sometimes it feels like there's too many of these Zoom meetings and things like that. People use this term Zoom fatigue these days.
Yeah.
But it's important that we keep FaceTiming and Skyping and Zooming and calling people up on the phone. Loneliness is a big problem, especially right now, to the point where lots of people consider it a public health priority. And so it's super important to educate people in better using technology to maintain their mental and therefore physical health. So when you feel this impulse that maybe I'd rather not talk, I'll take the easy way out and just send a quick text or email, or maybe I'll skip this happy hour or something like that. My own experience, it's funny being, we talk about ourselves like we're experts because we do this research, but I make the same mistakes that everybody else does. I'm trying to live a happy life. And so there's been cases where people that I haven't interacted with in a long time, like 15 to 20 years over the last several months, have said, hey, how about we have a Zoom happy hour? And I think that's, we haven't talked in a long time. This might be kind of strange. And so I'm hesitant to do it, just like everybody else might be at times. But then when I do it, I'm like, that was amazing. Why haven't we been doing this the whole time? We could have been talking to each other, and we didn't. So take advantage of those opportunities would be my main piece of advice. Make sure you're still connecting with other people.
Yeah. And go call your mom or your dad.
For sure.
Well, if you'd like to read Amit's full paper, again, it's called It's Surprisingly Nice to Hear You. Misunderstanding the Impact of Communication Media Can Lead to Suboptimal Choices of How to Connect with Others. Thank you so much for joining us today on our Big Ideas. We will see you next time.